All
right, let's do
welcome. Call to order the meeting of the Benton County Planning Commission, and we'll start with roll call. Commissioner Fulford.
Here.
Commissioner Wilson.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Cash.
Here.
Commissioner Hayman here. I think that's all that are present. And we have a quorum. And I don't have an agenda in front of me, so.
Well then,
We have the August 11th minutes, which were,
13th, August 13th.
oh, well, I can't read that.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thank
You're welcome.
you, Commissioner Wilson. I'll sit closer now.
No, it's okay. Here he comes.
There he is.
Oh, my
We just-
apologies. I really
it's
thought
okay.
45 minutes would be enough to get through Corvallis.
It's school
this me?
time.
It is.
Thank you.
We just started.
We just started, so.
Even a shoe. It's
Yeah.
great.
Well, welcome back, Nick.
Well, thank you.
Fowler.
Again, my apologies for coming late. Had you already convened?
We did.
We are reviewing the August 13th, 2024 minutes for approval.
And I make a motion to approve the August 13th amended minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. So I guess we're now looking at the September 3, 2024 minutes. Any amendments, corrections, and so forth?
One correction. Yes, brought it to Alyssa's attention. I am not listed in attendees, but was listed as voting. So it's small.
It helps the math.
It's a magic trick. I wasn't there, but I voted.
Okay. Any other amendments or corrections? Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, motion has passed. Minutes are approved. And just a couple of comments on minutes. We did have an email conversation with Petra and myself with respect to minutes. The county has a guideline which is for kind of minimalist minutes for each meeting. Minimalist meaning attendees, motions, who made the motion, second. So essentially attendees, decisions, and agenda. And minimally covering and summarizing the discussion. So we don't have to adopt that. We are an independent commission, but I am personally in favor of it, especially given that we also record the entire session. And so the entire session is available for anyone who would like to see the entire session. And that makes the minute keeping a bit easier for our intrepid stenographer and note taker. And so any discussion on the minutes, any objection to a minimalist approach consistent with the county guidelines, especially given that we have the entire meeting recorded? Yes.
Just a quick question. The September 3rd minutes were what I would consider pretty comprehensive in terms of the discussion points, the motions, and the votes. But did this follow that guideline?
Well, I believe, and I don't mean to put words into Petra's mouth,
Sure.
but I believe a compromise was attempting to be struck between some of the comments that commissioners have made with respect to reflections of full discussions at meetings, in contrast to a guideline and the legal requirement that very minimal recording of decisions needs to take place. So with this discussion, go ahead, Evelyn, please.
I just want to know how easy it is to get to those recordings.
Yeah. I was gonna say.
Is it click away?
Yeah, we post them the day after on the planning commission site.
On the planning commission side.
Yeah, it's important for all of us because if we do miss a meeting and we want to participate in a follow-up or a continuance of a hearing, it's a great way to review the entire record. It's just to, and one nice thing you can do is you can do it double fast. And so you can actually do it quicker than in real time. So it is available.
No, I noted that it was clear, it was concise, it was long, but that just reflected that our meeting, the last meeting that we had held where we were in deliberations and approving 2 additional items that, so it was lengthy, but concise is the best way I can describe it. So, yeah, I mean, as long as the recordings are easily available to us for review, I would have no objections to staying to the county's guidelines.
Very good. So Petra, if you could provide that guidance to Ms. Thompson. And we will look forward to even more abbreviated minutes in the future.
Sure, just a couple of things on that, if I might. One is that Alyssa has chosen to move on. This is her last meeting. Super sad. She's been so great to work with these last few months. But you kind of have your own business idea, so it's all good, right? And then the other thing is that I implemented a pilot project to use AI to do our minutes, our written minutes. So thank you for the feedback around the accuracy and such. So we're still auditing the minutes, but we're experimenting with ways to keep it concise and minimalist. And it seems so far to be working really well and saving us a ton of time.
So were the September 3rd minutes put together with AI? Oh, okay. I'm impressed.
Any other comments on our process of taking and approving minutes? Seeing none, we are overdue for some training, and my apologies to all of our trainers this evening that we've had to defer you. And we very much appreciate you coming in this evening. We have kind of a water theme that is kind of flowing through our training process. So we very much look forward to the training. And so we will begin with Scott Kruger and the health permitting overview. Petra, any comments before we jump right into this?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'm Scott Kruger, I'm the Environmental Health Program Manager. I've been on staff, just finished my 19th season. 16 of that was field staff, 2 acting as capacity as the manager, and 1 just shy of 1 year of being the actual manager.
How many winning seasons?
Well, I'm still employed and getting a paycheck, so I guess I would say that they're all winning seasons. We'll scratch the COVID years. In 2000, and I started in September of 2005. In September of 2007, I was voluntold that I was taking over the drinking water program with little background or experience. I've been doing it ever since. We have a light program with 4 field staff, 2 permits, clerks, and myself. That will be transitioning over to another field staff in the immediate future. But for right now, I'm still taking care of that issue. And then kind of by default, I got labeled as the water guy. Generally, my role is in with the Oregon Health Authority and Drinking Water Services, as I'm a delegate of them, and I get paid to do the work in Benton County for the Oregon Health Authority. And then I do a little work with community development when they have water quality issues, and we discuss best management practices for generally for people that are having issues with bacteria or nitrates for the most part. So let's get started, and that's me. And where do we point?
Well, you should be able to point it.
Okay, there we go. So just a little overview. You know, I think that most people think that it's open the tap and it all seems very simple. But it gets pretty complicated when you get into the public water side and you start processing drinking water rule. You, all being the planning commission, are probably very aware of, you know, sale or exchange of real estate and the state laws that govern, you know, bacteria, nitrates and arsenics during a sale. That's embedded in our development code. We have had grant programs in the past to deal with domestic well safety. We received some grant funding for 3 turns from the Oregon Health Authority, pretty small grants, $3,000 to $5,000, supported an intern from Oregon State to do field work. And then we, I believe the highest amount that we got was we were able to do 100 tests or service 100 homes in our rural area for coliform, nitrates and arsenic. And so that was a pretty good program, but then they sunsetted that for us because we got the grant on multiple occasions, so they let other people participate and get the grant money. And now through public health modernization, we got more funding. And so we're collaborating with Oregon State University and starting a full domestic well safety program that's facilitated by the folks over there. And I think that we have enough funding to reach about 400 for homes. And that should start very soon. And so we're just waiting for contracts to be signed and final.
Is that testing or is it some mitigation?
Not so much mitigation, suggestions on mitigation, but definitely testing. We'll be looking again at bacteria, nitrates, arsenic, and if needed, lead. Depending on what they see on site, they may do some assistance for folks with that have old galvanized pipes and possibly lead solder. So
I'm aware that Marion County has an issue with saltwater incursion. Do we in Benton County have any areas of saltwater incursion that are an issue? So do you test for salt as well as some of these?
Public water systems definitely test for sodium. Raintree Estates, just to the east of us here, south of, what is it? Yeah. Once you get past Harrison and 53rd, I guess I don't know the name of that street, but they're up there above the substation there as you're heading up towards the lambing barns. They test a little bit high for sodium, and mostly it's reporting back to their resident base for people who might have issues with higher levels of sodium. And it's not extreme. Having said that, if you go up to Kings Valley and even behind the Kings Valley Charter School, you can look at well logs from Oregon Water Resources, and they show they had to abandon wells because the salinity was so high, which makes sense that we're getting to the Coast Range and we're getting hidden salt deposits that are, you know, subsurface, obviously. So
Logston Bridge also.
What's that?
Logston Bridge above Pettibone.
Right.
They have brackish water.
Right.
It's really hard to find water in that neck of the woods.
Okay. Hello. There we go. So as I said, I'm the delegate of the Oregon Health Authority Drinking Water Services. They give me a stipend every year to do this work. And I have oversight of all the regulated groundwater wells in Benton County that serve a population of 3,300 or less. The surface water systems tend to be more complex in their processes in treating the water. So the Oregon Health Authority retains those systems. So my lead person, Sean Stevenson, out of Springfield, will do the inspections and overviews of the large municipalities. Generally, that looks like Adair, Philomath, Corvallis. That's kind of one of the things that I always talk about, you know, unless you're in Corvallis, Monroe, Adair, or Philomath, everybody else is on septic and groundwater.
Oh.
You know, and so I'm relatively small. We only have 62 public water systems, soon to be 63 with, you know, about, you know, a little over 4,300 people. And, you know, if you would compare that to some of my other county counterparts, like say Clackamas County that has 350 public water systems, you know, big county, lots of area. Same would be true for like our neighbors in Lynn County. You know, they're everywhere from the river all the way up to Hoodoo and lots of groundwater wells. So this is just a little overview of system classification and typing. Basically, at the most basic level, if you have less than 4 connections, like we had a homeowners association with 4 or more connections on a shared well, they would be a public water system. Or for a place like an organizational camp, for example, if you weren't, you know, providing water to 10 or more people at least 60 days out of the year, if you aren't, then you're not regulated. And then we move up the scale here. So if you have 25 or year-round residents, you're classified as a community system. And generally what that means is that it's increased analyte testing. So those folks will be on monthly bacterial sampling, annual nitrates, and then some variation of schedules of inorganic compounds, synthetic organic compounds, volatile organic compounds, lead and copper radionuclides. And then as we move down the scale, the non-transient, non-communities, that would look more like Mountain View Elementary, for example. You have a population greater than 25 on the property for 6 months out of the year, but not full year residents. So they have to do everything that the community system does, except for the radionuclide testing. And then you have the transient non-community. So an example of that would be like Alpine Tavern. They're transient, they have a small staff, you know, maybe 4 or 5 staff, but then, you know, guests come and they go. And so their testing looks more like quarterly bacterial, annual nitrate, and an arsenic test. And that's only a one-time arsenic test for them. Once they've done it, they don't have to do it again. And then we have new rules that came into effect in January 1st of 22. These were called state regulated systems because the EPA did not recognize this category. They only recognized the first 3. So this is specialized to the Oregon legislature. And then over the years, they've recognized that these small systems don't have a lot of infrastructure and mostly cash. And so they've lightened the rules on them fairly heavily. And so as they do testing and they go through time, their reductions to nitrates can be every 3 years. They could get the reductions for bacterial testing to once a year. And I think those are the 2 major changes for them. But they're very small and, you know, don't actually inspect those systems because there's not a lot of funding to go around. And so we certainly follow up if there's any water quality bacterial issues with those systems. But we inspect the other systems, just like if I was going out to inspect a restaurant. Their community systems are on a 3-year schedule. Unless they're an outstanding performer and meet a set of criteria, then they can be on a 5-year schedule. The NTNCs are 5 and the transients are 5. And so I go through the cycle on that intervals and go out and do inspections and make sure they're being run according to state standards. This is just a little overview of the drinking water services page. It's a wealth of information. And again, this is geared towards public water systems specifically. I don't know, were you guys aware of the Safe Drinking Water Information System at all? Okay, well, that's great. You can actually QR it right there if you'd like. Or not. Okay, there we go. This is interesting, and we highlighted this just because on their homepage is this water advisory map. And so if people are on boil water notices, generally in our area, what that looks like is we had a break in a pipe, we had a total loss of pressure. Then the system does the repair, brings the system back online until they can do testing to prove that the system's free of bacteria. Then the boil water advisory stays in effect for the residents. We've had a number of them out on Elliott Circle at Knoll Terrace Park over the last few years. It got very hot topic and was in the newspaper, and you know, old system, old pipes, homes go out, homes come in, pipes get broken, losses of pressure, and it's, you know, so they've had quite a few, and so I work with them to make sure that they're putting out notices to the community and that they're doing follow-up testing and making sure things are okay. And so looks like if this map is up to date and current, we've just got a couple going on in the state right at the moment, not too many. And this is the it's called Data Online, or SIDWIS, again, Safe Drinking Water Information System. You can go up here into the water system search, and all public water system information is obviously public. And so each one of the systems has its own webpage, and they report out all of that, all of their drinking water information. You can see, well, I don't think we went there with actually opening up a page. And I'm confused why.
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, over.
There we go.
So what I would say to you all is, if any of you at any time, I think you have some realtors on your group too, and we've given this presentation to realtors as well. At any time, if anybody has any questions or wants a tutorial how to navigate this system, maybe you live in a public water system. I think a lot of folks that live in areas that are served by groundwater that are public water systems don't even know that this exists, and they call and ask questions, and I can say, well, here's all the answers that you need right here. So it's a good system. This is just a little overview of the groundwater protection and well stewardship section in the domestic well safety program that the state runs. We often guide people to there, and then you can see, it has a links for land use and real estate transactions and lab testing. And then again, we're playing off of this program, and we have our own now, and I think that it will, well, it's just getting started, but it, all roads point to that it will be sustained and that we'll be able to continue it for years to come. So I'm hoping that they hold true to their word, because this is probably one of the single most important things that we got going on right now. As my previous statements, with all of those people that are in our community on septic and groundwater, and I can't tell you how many people out there are, I've been living here for 40 years and I've been drinking this water, for a long time, and I'm healthy as a horse, and then they find out they're running it 7, 8, 9 parts per million, nitrates, or they've been drinking, water that's contaminated, and, so it's knowledge is power for folks on this part. And so,
Do you see any trends in the testing that you do routinely, especially any disturbing trends that we should be aware of?
It's been several years, so we haven't even started yet. So historically, when we were running it before, some trends in bacteria. I think the bigger trend would lead in the nitrates. We're in the Southern Willamette Valley groundwater management area, which runs from Culver to North Albany, right around Nevergall Loop. I thought it was only on the east side of Highway 20, but it does encompass both sides of Highway 20. And most of those people have higher levels of nitrates. We've had a couple that exceeded the MCL, which is 10. So if you go down the line in our area, the Corvallis Waldorf School exceeded and needed to install treatment. Several individual homes along the way there were in the domestic well testing program earlier and tested high for nitrates above levels of 5. Children's Farm Home consistently tests between 7 and 9, and on down the line. Garland Nursery is on the cusp. They tend to test it between 9 and 10 and just barely fall under the wire. And so, yeah, there's some definite trends in our county for that.
But you would, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you might say that the state of Benton County's water quality is good? Or it's concerning, or we've got problems?
I would say in the groundwater management area, it's concerning, for sure. It's all non-point source contribution to the nitrification of the water, and everybody's downstream from everybody else. And so you can't point to a single contributing factor that's adding to that. And DEQ's working very diligently to keep up with monitoring wells. In fact, I'm actually serving on that committee coming up, our first meeting coming up next, well, actually in a few weeks. And so I'll be participating with that. I think that's the biggest trend that we're seeing right at the moment.
So nitrates are the area of concern.
I think that's probably the highest area of concern for us right now. And I think that we're, trying to make strides to get that resolved, but I'm not sure that will happen in my career, but they're certainly working on it nonstop.
And what would a homeowner, are nitrates, can they be mitigated at the wellhead?
They can be.
Okay.
Generally, what you're looking at with people and mitigating nitrates is either installing a reverse osmosis system, which can be rather expensive. I think to a lesser extent, people usually put ion exchange systems on, which is just, basically running your water through salt.
Oh.
And it reduces the levels. And that's actually a great question. I mean, even with, we tend to run on a little bit lower side. I do know of areas, let's say out in the Silverton area, that test in the hundreds versus us that generally test, I haven't seen anything higher than 11. But the Waldorf School actually used to belong to the Corvallis School District, and I think it was called Fair Play. And before it sold, they actually breached and they had to install that treatment, and they were at like 11.5, and with the installation of treatment, they're consistently down at 2 to 3. So it does have some good mitigating effect, but if you're a single, or a homeowner, that's probably not as cheap of a venture to install an ion exchange system, and then it's only as good as it's being maintained.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're constantly talking about that issue with folks. So, any other questions for me? Well, you can feel free to reach out to me anytime. Like I said, I'm the water guy, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions or concerns. Or if any individuals want tutorials about the safe drinking water system and how that navigates, just please feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to assist.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Kurtz and Ms. Steinglass.
So our presentation is pretty acronym dense.
I actually double-sided printed them, so.
So that's just a cheat sheet.
You have a glossary.
Completely lost with what we're talking about. Excuse me, so I
Do you want to sit or stand?
I'll stand if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll stand up when it's my time.
So I'm here to talk to you about stormwater, and the stormwater program at Benton County has it's been in existence since approximately like 2001 or so. The reason that we have a stormwater system program obligation is related to the census results in the year 2000. And what happened was that, I'll start this first slide. So our stormwater system is an extension or a implementation of conditions that were basically created in the Clean Water Act, which was first enacted in 1948 and then was significantly modified in 1972. And the Clean Water Act is, there are a whole series of acts, a whole series of legislations that happened that had to do with a wide variety of water-related issues. And so the 1948 Act really had a lot to do with industrial sewage and management of wastewater standards for treatment plants, for municipalities, and for larger industrial areas. Whereas in 1972, I think you all remember the pictures of the Cuyahoga River, which caught fire repeatedly for years and years and years. And finally, somebody publicized it, and it became like a flashpoint or the fun for this movement. And I should note that the Cuyahoga River had been on fire enough times that the local fire departments knew how to fight the fires that broke out on the river. So there wasn't just one fire, there was like 10 years of fires. And it just took a really long time for people to recognize that this was, that rivers shouldn't be burning. So the other thing that it brought was like this national water quality criteria for various types of pollutants. And of course, that list has been added to progressively for years since. So our program, the reason that we have a stormwater program is directly related to the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, the NPDES system. And the first phase of the NPDES program was to address communities with a population of 100,000 or more. And so there was this big push through, I would say, the early part of the 80s into the 90s to get larger municipalities to recognize that, first of all, that their sanitary sewer and stormwater systems needed to be separated. There still are a lot of systems in the east and south where the sanitary sewer and stormwater share the same conveyance systems, and then are diverted to a plant where they're treated. And in circumstances where you have really high flows, you've got sewage that's just automatically discharged into whatever receiving water that they have there. Obviously, that's not a good thing. And so one of the things that happened at that larger level, the 100,000 plus level, was, separate your sanitary sewer from your stormwater systems, recognize that stormwater is a pollution source, and start working on what is essentially non-point source pollution, which is the stuff that's untraceable basically because it comes from habitual uses or improper uses of pollutants that enter the storm drain system from places like yards and roofs and driveways and roads and septic systems, where the effect it's not noticeable on a property by property basis, but when you accumulate all of those effects, you've got a problem. So that's where this program came from. So the EPA has mandated that state governments have to improve the quality of their stormwater, right? And the phase one system was for these cities that were 100,000 or more. And there's NPDES phase one, and we are a phase two community. That threshold is 50,000 people, and that goes back to the 2000 census thing, because that's where Corvallis first tracked over 50,000 people. And these mandates come from EPA and are then implemented by DEQ at the state level. And then it comes to us to do the boots on the ground work. So phase one was introduced in 90. There we go. They were working on it in the 80s, but it was finally implemented in 90. And phase two was implemented in the year 2000. So what ended up happening is that a boundary was determined around the city of Corvallis that is based entirely on population density.
it's a weird boundary. It does not follow the urban growth boundary of any of the municipalities. It does not follow any of the city limits, although it does encompass all of the city limits of Corvallis and Philomath. It doesn't follow the boundary even of the local metropolitan planning organization. It has its own separate area where it's implemented. In our particular phase, our phase 2 area is complicated by the fact that it encompasses 2 local municipalities, Philomath and Corvallis, and all of their urban growth boundaries, and then additional properties beyond that. There are some sections of the urban growth boundary in Corvallis where the density wasn't high enough that that area of Corvallis would be included. Like the Crescent Valley area is not included in the what is referred to as the federally recognized urbanized area. However, the neighborhood to the north, up in the Mountain View neighborhood, is dense enough to be included in that boundary, but it's outside the urban growth boundary, and so you have odd boundaries that broach jurisdictional lines and make, drawing a line for where someone's going to comply with various regulations kind of tricky. And some of you may remember is that when we came through and we changed the code and we were on our last segment of implementation of the last MS4 permit, the last MPDS permit that we towed the line for, we changed the county code, and rather than try to figure out where that boundary applied and to have a specific standard for somebody on one side of the fence and a different standard for somebody on the other side of that fence, we decided that we would implement our plans countywide. The reasons for that also were supported by the fact that our TMDL program, which is the total maximum daily load program, which is managed by community development, is also countywide and has to do with a lot of the same pollutants that we deal with from a stormwater standpoint. The 2 programs dovetail into one another, but they are not, they aren't completely contained by one another. It's an intersection on a Venn diagram. So there are a lot of things that we do with the MPDS program that apply to the TMDL program, and a lot of things that the TMDL program applies to the MPDS program, but they are separate programs. So that was a mouthful. So the phase 2 implementation plan has always had 6 major control measures. You got public education and outreach, you have public involvement and participation, illicit discharge detection and elimination. I'm going to skip to pollution prevention and good housekeeping, and that's like our taking care of our own facilities and our own grounds and that kind of stuff. The 2 that we most recently implemented were the construction site runoff control and the post-construction stormwater management. And the reason those are circled there is because we used this slide, of course, when we were doing presentations to the Board of Commissioners and to you all when we did this implementation, but also because that's where the meat of our requirements are, in terms of what somebody's going to have to do if they want to build a house, to create a subdivision, to do a series partition or something like that. They're going to have to toe these lines. And I think the simplest of the 2 is the construction site. Back one.
So while you're doing
Construction
that, this is kind of a, I guess, a legal or enforcement question, given that it was an election to apply this to the entire county. Does that in any way hamstring the ability to enforce these?
No, the code is the code. And so one of the things that we've run into is that we do not have sufficient enforcement capability. We have one of the conditions of the illicit discharge detection and elimination was to make sure that within the code, there was an escalating enforcement action tier or a suite of escalating enforcement actions that you can do. And they start with notification, verbal notification, written notification of a violation, written notification of continuing violation, stop work order, and then after that, there's like some kind of punitive measure. In conversations with county council, they've been relatively reluctant to go to that fines and fees
That's changing.
direction. Okay, and I wasn't aware of that, so.
And I'm just asking kind of in a real world situation. We currently have PUD construction continuing at Callaway Creek, and they're doing infrastructure construction, which means they're disturbing ground, they are building, they are pouring concrete, et cetera, et cetera. So when the permits are issued for those types of construction activities, these are the conditions of those permits?
Not for the city of Adair.
Okay,
The city of Adair manages its own NVDS program.
that's what I thought.
It's still not apparent to me what happened back in the day, but when the MS4 was first, and I'll define an MS4 now. An MS4 permit is basically it's municipal separate storm sewer system, and it's an acronym that's used regularly by EPA and DEQ. However, it's relatively archaic. We don't refer to storm sewers anymore. We refer to storm drainage systems. And the reason they were once called storm sewers is because they carried both storm and sewer. They're not supposed to do that. And so the language, unfortunately, has been stuck in this acronym. But when the MS4 boundary, as you can see, it's relatively large. When it was first established.
That's the yellow versus the green.
When it was first established, Adair Village was included. And when we asked DEQ how we were to deal with Adair Village specifically, we were told that Adair had been granted some kind of exemption for that they would be able to handle their own stuff for the time being. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of development in Adair in the last 20 years. However, each of those large developments that have occurred out there have disturbed more than an acre of the property, right? And so as a result, they have to go to DEQ to pull a permit similar to our erosion and sediment control permit. And so their permitting was covered by application for what is referred to as a 1200C permit. It's a stormwater, construction stormwater permit that's issued by DEQ.
All right.
It's a lot more complicated than our permit. It's a lot more expensive than our permit. It's a lot more difficult to administer than our permit. And in a lot of ways, I'm kind of glad that they're handling their own stuff. It's my understanding that when the next MS4 permit is issued, which I'm guessing will be the first part of next year, these permits are reissued like once every 5 years. When the next MS4 permit is issued, Adair will likely have its own MS4 designation. Okay. And then they will have to comply with the same implementation processes that we've dealt with over the course of the last 10 years. So, and I think they're prepared for it.
Well, yes, and I think they're in the process now, I know of preparing their not annual report, but there's a report that's required to DEQ and the state that addresses all of the issues, including the provision of water as well.
Yeah, and for a community like Adair, it does make sense for them to handle their own activities. And in truth, it was kind of a relief for us that we didn't have to deal with it because in truth, we already had our hands full with both the city of Corvallis and the Sheriff of Loma. Now,
What does the green represent? Just,
Well, this is the green areas. I should start by saying that the MS4 was established by the population density in the year 2000, right? 2010 came along, population densities change, but the boundary never gets smaller. It only gets larger. So the original boundary counts, whether or not the population density falls within that boundary. But if it increases outside that boundary, the boundary increases. So this is the current status of the MS4. And this is a separate MS4 that is Lynn County and the city of Albany.
Mhm.
However, when they established the city of Albany's MS4 boundary, they included this pocket of the county that is outside of the city limits and also outside of the city's urban growth boundary.
Hmm.
In North Albany, the city's urban growth boundary and their city limits are concurrent. And so anything outside the city limits is outside the urban growth boundary and therefore is not North Albany's problem. So we went to DEQ and said, what are we gonna do about this? I mean, obviously there's something in the county. Obviously it's not part of our MS4. It's part of their MS4 because of the way that the population pockets are, they have to be contiguous. Or that population density has to be contiguous. And so it was discontiguous from ours. And they said, well, for the time being, you guys can just handle it. And so in the meantime, anything that happens up in that neck of the woods has to tow our line.
Oh,
And the city of Albany and Lynn County have worked cooperatively to tow this line. And in actuality, the city of Albany had really good stormwater practices in place long before any of these requirements came down. They knew they could read the writing on the wall, and they had all of this stuff figured out long before they needed to. Now, back in our neck of the woods in Corvallis, they have their own stormwater personnel, their own stormwater standards. They're far more rigorous than our own standards. They basically manage their own stuff within the city limits. Anything that happens within the Corvallis urban growth boundary, we ask that they tow the city's lines, that they meet the city's regulations, simply because eventually those properties will be annexed into the city and they'll need to meet those requirements for annexation. That'll be one of the things that people ask at annexation. And so as a result, we're doing development a favor by requesting that they tow the city's line rather than our own for their future benefit. Now, finally, Philomath. Philomath didn't want to have anything to do with this. They basically said, we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the people on staff who have the knowledge to do this. And so by intergovernmental agreement, we agreed to take care of their NPDES implementation needs. And so currently at least the county's responsibility, Shay's and my own and Laura Byers' responsibility is for these green areas and the city of Philomath. We also, like I said, we have some administrative influence on what happens inside the Corvallis urban growth boundary. But for the most part, I'm going to shunt that off to the city of Corvallis and say, go talk to them, get their permits in place, bring those to me. Once they're approved, I'll approve them. And so we're really just acting as an agent in that respect. We're not really acting as a regulatory agency. So now, so the MS4 it's this changing boundary, but like I said, it only gets bigger. And so our responsibilities only grow as time goes on.
Where do you want to go? I don't think everybody's looking.
That's weird. Okay, back another one, I think. One more back.
But we're going forward.
Yeah, we're going forward.
So just, sorry, you want this page or the next one?
The one before this one. Okay. It's wrong. Okay, I thought there was another slide in there and there's not. I apologize. Finding myself in here so I know what I'm. Okay, there we go. Yeah, you were on the right slide. So the next one. So, we get these MS4 permits from DEQ, and like I said, they're renewed like once every 5 years. The first MS4 permit came out in, I think, in 2004, and they were supposed to renew, of course, in 2009. It took until 2015 to get a new permit because of the legal challenges to it. And the 2015 permit came through, didn't have a lot of really substantive changes to what was required of us. However, the next permit that came out, which was in 2018, is that right? 18, I think it
Yes.
was, had a whole list of stuff that we needed to do that we'd never had to do before. And that's where the construction site erosion and sediment control code came from, and the post-construction stormwater management. So you can see the tier here. It's like you start at the EPA, the federal government mandates everything to DEQ. DEQ then refers to us, the counties and the cities, and says you need to implement these plans. And then we impose these requirements on developers and builders.
But Adair does it for Adair.
For Adair, yes. So next slide is where it gets dense. Our construction site erosion and sediment control, it was established by the MS4 permit that there were two thresholds. The first was how much are you going to disturb while you're building? And that threshold is a quarter acre. Jumping ahead just a little ways, confusingly, the post-construction stormwater threshold was also a quarter acre, but that's measuring impermeable surfaces that you've created on site in the post-construction condition.
Asphalt, concrete.
Asphalt, concrete, patios, even a swimming pool, we count as an impermeable surface. So for construction sites, we say, okay, are you going to disturb more than a quarter acre? If you do disturb more than a quarter acre, you have to come to us and get an erosion and sediment control permit. That process is relatively straightforward. The permit's about $760, increases about 4% every year. A portion of that goes to community development. And so we cover that window between a quarter acre up to 1 acre.
And can you define project? When does a project become a project that requires a permit?
A permit, yeah.
Technically, any ground disturbing activity that is not directly related to agriculture or forest practices.
So putting in a new lawn.
Technically, yes.
Or a pool, as you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the thing is that what's going to trigger that? A building permit. And so if somebody actually walks in the door at community development, building department says, I want to build X, X, and X, that's where this triggers for us.
Okay.
We can't run around the county and chase every guy with a bobcat who's wrecking havoc on his property. I mean, we don't have that kind of bandwidth, and I wouldn't want to have those conversations anywhere.
I wouldn't either.
One of the things that's really important about the program is being able to message this correctly and get the message out to the public and make them recognize that these activities actually do have a deleterious effect on our water quality long-term. And not a lot of people, I mean, a lot of people don't recognize that. And second of all, not a lot of people believe it if you tell them. But there's undeniable factual truths that our human activities are having a negative effect on aquatic life and on our waterways.
But that applies to agriculture as well, but they're exempt.
It does.
Right.
And this is a very important dividing line here, is that forest practices and agricultural practices are not regulated the way that development practices are regulated. And trying to bring those two or those three regulatory processes closer together is an ongoing battle. There are still people who will take a residential property, clear cut it under a forest practices permit, an NOAP notification to ODF, and then claim they haven't disturbed any of their property because it was covered by the ODF permit. To some extent, we've been forced to agree with that, but if they stump the property, then it becomes a residential use. They're no longer going to be planting trees there. And the use of the property is essentially changed. It's been taken out of production and put into residential use. And that's where we kind of run into a lot of conflicts. Doesn't happen very often, but it has happened several times. There are a couple of pending enforcement actions. I should say also that I think people are less likely to do that now than they were, say, 5 years ago. I think the culture of building is changing. I think there's also a trend towards building smaller, which also makes a dent in how much hard surface you're putting out and how much land you're disturbing to build your home.
I'm just thinking about a piece of property. It's somewhere in the county. The property was clear cut, so I'm assuming it was forest conservation land. Then it was stumped, but then they planted grass, agricultural grass. And so I don't know, is that a process of converting forest conservation to EFU? Or
it might have been timber that fell on EFU property.
I see.
That would be my conjecture, but I'd have to look at the property specifically to be able to answer.
Well, that might be more effective. Yeah.
And that process there has been in the past, and I would defer to Petra on this one, but in the past, people have asked, well, okay, I've got this forest conservation property, but really what I want to do is that I want to grow hemp here or something like that.
Okay.
Is there a way to change forest conservation zoning into agricultural zoning and vice versa?
Vice versa, I'm not sure. There's select exemptions
Okay.
or conditional uses, but I don't know them off the top of my head.
Under the code, right?
Yeah, and you see, I think it's kind of case by case in that regard. For the most part, I think like if you've got a stand up old growth up at the top of Mary's Peak or something like that, and you want to clear cut it and put it in a hemp farm, I don't think that's going to fly. But stranger things have happened. I suppose it's possible given the appropriate conditional use. So,
Could you comment on our favorite hypothetical land use application of a landfill?
oh, okay. Landfill is covered by an entirely different segment of the DEQ hierarchy.
So it's not subject to any of this, even the roads that they might build?
They are subject to. They're subject to the DEQ's 1200C program. And so in addition to, I think they have several different permits, if I'm not mistaken. I think there is a 1200Z permit, which is an industrial stormwater discharge permit. There's a 1200C permit that would be in effect anytime they do modifications to the site, because it's associated exclusively with construction, and has different discharge parameters and such. And then in addition to that, they're also beholden to the powers that cover landfill activities and waste disposal and the handling of toxic substances and that sort of thing. And so
I would guess that they have, I would guess they have 4 or more DEQ permits that they have to toe the line for.
So they're issued by the state. And
Issued by the state.
directed by federal and state law.
Yes.
In terms of.
Yeah. And again, this is one of those circumstances where bandwidth and, how much money do we have for lawyers and stuff like that? I wouldn't want to fight with them. I can see. DEQ is a large enough organization that they can fight with an organization like Allied Waste. Benton County, I think, is a little too small to be able to handle that. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily, their activities are condoned. But at the same time, what I'm saying is that it's a very large fish in a very small pan. So anyway, so if you go over that acre, like in Adair,
Right.
you have to go get that 1200C permit. Well, because of the way that the MS4 is worded, you also have to come back and get a permit from us at the end of that process. The
So
exception to
then
that,
you are still issuing a permit even for a dare eventually.
no, because of their exemption.
Because of their exception.
Because of their
Under
exemption.
MS4, okay.
Now, what's a good example? Legacy Estates on Arboretum. They brought in water from Adair to make that subdivision happen.
Right.
And so the amount of disturbance that was done in order to build the pipeline and to get water to that point, in addition to the amount of disturbance they did to build the subdivision itself, were all included in our 1200C permit that we required them to get, and were included in our ESC permit as well.
Right, because that fell in the county,
Because that fell in the county and outside
Okay.
Adair.
even though Adair is providing.
Even though Adair is supplying the utility.
So how does Monroe fit into that?
Monroe, it has its own, they toe the line the same way that Adair does. What happened with Monroe is, again, I don't have a real clear picture in my head of what happened, but somehow they obtained an exemption. And it may have been the fact that when the MS4 was first established, there was a finger of population density surrounding Highway 99 that connected Adair to our original MS4 boundary, and so it was contiguous. And so Adair's exception was kind of a big deal because they were part of our MS4, and they said, no, we want to sever ourselves from you. And once they were excluded from our population density, our MS4 boundary fell back, but that node remained because of the stipulation that it cannot shrink. I think the reason that Monroe wasn't originally included in this is because Monroe was not contiguous with the rest of the MS4. Now, I think with this next MS4 permit, which is in the works right now, Monroe and Adair are both going to have to start developing these kinds of programs for their municipal use. They're not easy to develop and they're not easy to maintain. There's a lot of legwork. They can testify to that. I mean, when Shaking on board, I was completely underwater. She just completely saved the day by being the extra person in this program to make things happen.
Now I'm underwater, so.
So this next round of the renewal of the MS4 may require Adair and Monroe to either develop the programs that you're offering on their own to the community, or
I suppose that there's a possibility they could petition the board, and I would guess that they would have to talk to you all also to have us cover them through some kind of
intergovernmental agreement. Okay.
But I think if that were the case, we would likely make it difficult for them. Is what I would say. we would ask for a full-time employee or something like that. We would ask for compensation for the personnel that we would have to devote.
So in some respects, it's still going to cost Adair a resource, funding in order to meet the dynamics of the new MS4
Yeah,
internally or externally through
exactly.
an IGA. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And you know, it's interesting because an FTE doesn't go a long way for a program like this, simply because it has so many moving parts. The number of moving parts, the number of little nuancy things that we have to fill out on the annual report and stuff like that. It's really kind of mind boggling. You get to the end of the year, you look at the annual report and you just go, wow, okay, you know, you've got 6 control measures, but you have a 35-page annual report that's really just yeses and nos. And then on top of that, if we were to ever be audited, you know, the supporting documentation for all the stuff that we put into the annual report would be easily thousands of pages of materials that they would have to go through to confirm that we were actually towing the lines that we claim we're towing. So I think I went over like the fact that inside the UGBs, we asked that the respective communities' standards be met. And that's really just a service to future planners and future people who have to deal with annexations at some point in the future. And then if you disturb less than a quarter acre, you don't have to worry about it at all. So then we come to the complicated part of this, which is the post-construction management. So I'll preface this by saying that despite the fact that we apply our code countywide, in the year and a half since we implemented this, we implemented everything on February 22nd, 23rd,
I don't remember
2023.
day, yeah.
I think it was February 23rd, 2023. So it's been a year and a half. In that amount of time, we've only had one of post-construction stormwater management application. Everybody else has kept their impermeable area below a quarter acre. But if you create a quarter acre or more of impermeable surface, you basically have to go get an engineer. The engineer has to do a hydrologic analysis of the site. The engineer has to determine what the runoff is from the 2-year, 24-hour storm. He then has to design a treatment and a detention facility for water quality and for water quantity, and create an operations and maintenance manual for that facility or those facilities. And then the owner must sign a long-term maintenance agreement that outlines all of these nuances and puts them on, it puts a notice on the property. It travels with the property, so it doesn't go, it's exchanged from owner to owner. It gives everybody the idea, you know, if you buy a house or you want to buy a property and it's encumbered with this long-term maintenance agreement, they will suddenly realize, okay, we have this extra maintenance that we have to do every year, that we have a report that we have to provide to the county every year. And those reports then go into our annual report and go to DEQ for their review. Forever. And that you can see, I mean, it's really a boom that we've only had one of these in a year and a half.
Yeah.
Because
But there's a number of, I'm thinking of like an equestrian pole barn is often greater than 15,000 square feet. Is that an impermeable area that is a disturbance?
Technically an impermeable area, but it's also an agricultural use. And there's an exemption for agricultural use.
Oh,
Suppose it's on our property.
I think that if it is in residential property, there is not an exemption, but I would have to defer to planners for that determination.
it's considered impermeable because the structure itself is displacing water to other.
Yeah. Impermeable surfaces are bad for 2 reasons. One, during the dry weather months, they tend to collect pollutants, dust, airborne fallout from, from China, lots of sulfur and carbon, mercury. And it builds up on these impermeable surfaces over the course of the year. And when the rain hits, you get this first flush effect, and you get this, first of all, you've got very low water because it hasn't been raining for X amount of time. So and then you have this real high concentration of pollutants that are flushed into the system very quickly.
Into a low water system.
Into a low water system,
Right.
which increases the concentrations, which of course stresses aquatic life incredibly.
Right.
Then, so not only do you have this first flush activity, but then you also, because you've got impermeable surface, you don't have vegetation to mitigate the runoff. And so it's running off of those surfaces at a higher rate than it normally would in a natural condition. And as a result, what happens is you get these flashes of downstream inundations, where water is moving faster, where water is reaching those conveyances faster than it has historically. It also reduces the amount of groundwater recharge. There's less surface area to absorb water and draw it into the subsurface. And so you've got a whole bunch of little wheels that are moving again. You've got all these moving parts, a very complex system. It's all cumulative, and the effect is, I mean, it's noticeable and bad.
So this is an odd question, but for instance, the stormwater runoff retention pond that has been built for the new phase or the last phase of the current PUD, it seems to be different in distinction because they put PVC tile inside the retention pond, which I don't see in the other ones that they built. And then those have PVC risers coming up. And then of course they buried all of that under topsoil, which will
planted that.
Right, and it'll get planted. It's been sprayed. I just don't, and that seemed like a new feature to that retention pond that I don't see in the other pond or stormwater retention areas.
The technology and the I guess the implementation of detention, retention, and treatment systems is exploding right now.
Okay. So you're seeing new technology.
New technology, new techniques,
Okay.
a lot of passive filtration systems.
Okay.
What the goal is really to try and reduce the amount of long-term maintenance that you have and try to accomplish your water quality goals using natural means if possible. So
Understood. I see.
I'm going to draw an analogy here between what you're seeing in sort of relatively rural Adair Village. And, you've got a system of infiltration pipes in addition to native vegetation, which is designed to remove pollutants before it hits the open waterways where, the river otters and the beavers are living. You compare that to, say, a rain garden or something like that in an urban setting in Portland or in Salem or Eugene, where the water is running into these systems directly off of the streets. And in those circumstances, it hasn't really been determined yet what the turnover is on the medium that is being used to infiltrate to mitigate that water quality issue.
The water quality.
There's, you have to maintain plants, you have to replace mortality, you have to dig out the entire medium at some point because either the pores will fill, all of the voids in the pores will fill, or it'll become so contaminated and nothing will grow in it. Far more likely in a city, in an urban setting than in a suburban setting like Adair Village.
Right.
So, and the thing is that, as these technologies are growing and as they're developing, the mistakes of the past are sitting there sort of staring you in the face while you're trying to develop a new approach to that problem. And for further exacerbating this problem is the fact that our weather patterns have changed so significantly. So all of the hydrology that runs all of this stuff is based on intensity, duration, and frequency charts that were created from historic data in like the 60s and 70s.
But climate change.
When climate was completely different than it is now.
Right.
Nowadays, we get these really flashy, intense storms, and those RDF charts do not reflect that. And so what's happened is that the frequency of what was once considered to be, you know, the 100 or 50-year storm has increased beyond that once per 100-year expectation. And so even the data that we're using to analyze these things and develop responses to the challenges isn't completely accurate at this point in time. Now, there is an effort being made by NOAA at this point in time to adjust the IDF charts across the United States to make them focus on weather data that's occurred within the last 25 years, as opposed to weather data that's occurred over the course of the last 150 years. And so they're tightening up that window so that the data is not skewed by more moderate weather patterns that we experienced previously. So, obviously, there are, like I said, there are a lot of moving parts here. So when you get to that quarter-acre threshold, you've got this litany of things that you need to do. And it's another permit, it's a separate permit. And it's more expensive than the first permit. It involves engineering, which of course is more expensive than the first permit. It involves some legalities, which is more expensive than the first permit. And then you have to build extra structures and such. And so in the end, if you end up with this requirement, you could be spending as much as an extra $15,000 to $20,000 on your property, which I think is a pretty good argument for keeping your impact under a quarter acre, which in the long run, especially on 2-acre properties or something like that, is really a good thing, because what you've done is you've kind of concentrated everything in one place. You're allowing the rest of the property to function naturally. It's kind of a win-win. Now, some people just can't live in a house that's 2,000 square feet. I don't have that problem personally, but the proliferation of the McMansion in Benton County has slowed significantly. They're just not happening the way they were 10 years ago. And I think that reflects it reflects a change in demographics, it reflects a change in housing costs, but it also reflects a change in people's ideas about how they should manage their rural properties. So that said, let me see where I am here. I'm gonna, I've already gone through that last slide. I think that most of everything that's in that last slide I've already spoken of, like peripherally around the other topics. And so finally I am done and shaking.
Did you want to mention mitigation too? That folks have?
Oh, yes. This is one of the things thank you. This is one of the things that it's a little tricky, and it doesn't really meet the letter of what DEQ wants us to be doing, but it's a way that we have found to sort of accommodate people who are really close to that quarter-acre threshold of impermeable surface. If you're over your quarter-acre by 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 square feet, you can actually implement green infrastructure construction practices on your property that will give you credits to bring it back over that threshold again. Once you're up in the 15,000 square foot range, it's not possible. But one of the things that happens is that a lot of times, like somebody will want just 1,000 square foot house at the end of a quarter-mile long driveway. And so the quarter-mile long driveway takes up all of your disturbed area and your impervious area, because the road itself is impervious. So you have a couple of options in that instance. You can create drainage swales where there were ditches and construct them in such a manner that they're retaining water and cleaning water as they're routing water downhill. You can create pervious pavement surfaces for parking and for driving. And by pervious pavement, I don't necessarily mean the open porous concretes and asphalts that have been experimented with. It's the systems that I'm recommending are, for example, a Presto Geosystem, which is basically, it's a 6-inch tall web of cellular extruded high-density polyethylene. Those webs spread out, and then you nail them down, and with rebar or with anchoring tools, and then fill it with open graded rock. And what happens is that the cells create the compaction against which the rock creates its bearing capacity, and but still allows the water to go through and infiltrate below it. And so if you have this geosystem in your parking lot or your approach or an area that doesn't get a lot of really heavy truck traffic, you can create a permeable surface that for a facility that normally would be considered impervious. You can treat water in multiple ways. The best way to treat water is just to retain it on site. If you can shunt it into a pond with an overflow, that's the best thing you could possibly do, because the pond is going to help recharge groundwater in addition to allowing pollutants to settle out of it, et cetera. Like I said, the swales instead of ditches. Am I missing anything really obvious?
Underground injection.
Oh, that's a critical one. One of the things that's really cool is that if you have soils that will infiltrate rainfall effectively, you can route all of your roof drainage into that infiltration system and completely subtract the roof system from your impermeable surface.
Oh.
That's if you can find a place to infiltrate it. Now, historically, DEQ had a program called the UIC system, or Underground Injection Control System. And what they were doing is they were saying, we don't want dry wells in the valley. We don't want pollutants from the surface making it into our groundwater. And they sort of backtracked a little bit when another branch of DEQ came up with the impermeable surface requirements. And they said, okay, if it's just the roof and it's not any other pollutant source, then you can inject it into the ground and you don't have to go through the UIC program. The UIC program requires that, first of all, you be registered. Second of all, you got a maintenance agreement again. You have to sign paperwork. You have to provide annual reports, and you have to give them, I think, a water quality test like once every 5 years or something like that. And so you're exempted from those requirements of the normal UIC system. So that ability, if you can find soils that will infiltrate water, you can subtract your entire roof from it if you get your water to infiltrate. And you can create infiltration galleries as well on your property if you want to do that, kind of like reverse French drains, where you're piping water into the French drain in order to get it into the soil, as opposed to trying to cut off the water that's coming out of the soil and diverting it to a conveyance.
Oh, wow.
So what we're trying to do is try to develop as many alternative construction techniques as we can to give people options when they come to this. When we talk to engineers, we say, be creative. If it's not, a list of stuff that we've given you, and you come up with something that works, we'll look at it and review it and probably approve it. The idea is to be as flexible as possible and to be as creative as possible so that it doesn't become such a burden on the public that wants to build, but at the same time meets the intent of the regulation. So And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shay.
Address the question. Thank you. Has the county adopted another acknowledged jurisdictions, best management practices or low impact development standards?
No, not yet. We have low impact standards that are in draft format, but we have not fleshed them out. And the idea was that it was too big a lift for when we were trying to get our implementation done. And excuse me, Shay and I have tossed paperwork back and forth and kind of looked at a lot of municipalities, LID and best management practices and stuff like that, but we really haven't landed on anything. And I think before we really pull the trigger on that kind of thing, I would like to know, like I was saying, I'm asking engineers to be creative about how they address these issues and to bring ideas from other municipalities that I haven't seen or read or had the time to search through. I want to get some more experience under our belts before we actually purvey something like that or adopt another municipality's approach. The interesting thing about adopting another municipality's approach is that you really have to find another municipality or agency or jurisdictional agency that has similar values, similar economic circumstances, similar demographics, similar topography and areas or natural areas. And so that can be a little daunting sometimes. It's like, it would be very easy to, adopt King County's regulations, but then we'd have 4,000 pages of stuff that we had to administer. And
Well, my daughter just built a house in Menlo Park, California.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And they have a requirement that all rainwater stay on your lot.
Yeah.
It cannot go.
That is actually the letter of the law as it comes from the MS4s.
For the MS4s to have it all
Is
retained.
to have it all retained on property and to stay there.
And the
Which-
engineering that went
That's
into her
interesting.
house.
Wow.
I'm an engineer and it is phenomenal
Yeah.
what they had to do because the Bay Area gets a fair amount of rain in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And their water table is fairly high at that time of year. But they used all the mitigation practices that you just described and more. It's really impressive what they've done.
And the other thing is that oftentimes there isn't just like one solution. There's a whole suite of solutions that are basically interactive or interconnected in order to accomplish that long-term goal. And it is not cheap.
Wow.
It is not cheap at all.
Okay.
So the way I think the way that the code is worded is that you have to mitigate this 2-year 24-hour storm because it is the first flush event, and that after that you're working as the water table increases, as grounds become saturated, you have less and less treatment as time goes on.
Right.
But that still doesn't meet the letter of the law, which is everything stays on your property, which I just don't see how you can accomplish that, And I mean, you think about the density of Callaway Creek.
Right.
And it's like, where is that water going to
Well,
go?
well, I know where it's going, and I know that, and it's just interesting because they changed the technology for the next round so that pond will probably be more effective at treating the stormwater runoff than the ones we have now, which are, I think, adequate for the development, because there's, I don't know, there's like
5 phases.
well, there's 5 phases, but I'm thinking there are actually 4 or 5 of the retention.
Okay.
Of the
Yes.
stormwater retention treatment, whatever to call.
Yeah. And those are usually cited based on topographic concerns.
Right, and so that, and determined by how best, once the stormwater flows in, it gets, kind of treated.
Yeah.
And then flows out again into the waterway that we have nearest to it, that we're being effective in that, in that treatment, so, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify one, and I have a comment. First, everything that happens in North Albany is managed through Lynn County. Is that absolutely true?
It's actually managed through the city of Albany.
Okay.
And then Lynn County manages those areas outside of the city limits, but has the same kind of agreement with the city of Albany about, if there's a possibility that it could be annexed at some point in the future, then they'll have to meet the city of Albany's standards.
So this, yeah, in the last, I don't know how many years, 8 years that we built retention ponds in North Albany, they all have the plumbing, and I mean, they've been doing that for a while. So.
Yeah, and like I said, Albany was very progressive. They had this stuff on the books and were enforcing these kinds of stormwater standards. I would say a good 7, 8 years before the MS4 permit came through and really required it.
And the MS4 was implemented to separate the stormwater runoff from our sewer or sewage runoff, gray and dark water.
Well, the MS4 is really, it's kind of a blanket stormwater permitting process.
Okay.
And it has multiple points.
Sorry, Rick, I didn't want to interrupt.
That was okay. So my second is this commission has expressed a concern about affordable housing.
Yes.
You have on a number of occasions mentioned that this is an expensive process that impacts the cost of construction. I wonder, do you think about, or is anybody thinking about how those two interests intersect and what we might be doing about that?
Yeah, so that was something that really struck me with this permit. And I've mentioned it to DEQ as well as the Board of Commissioners, it is a bit of an equity problem, right? Because folks that have a lot of money to implement these types of things, it's no issue, but a single family, a moderate income on a small lot, this becomes a big challenge because you're trying to mitigate on a lot that you don't have space to do septic, setbacks and all this other stuff. And so we did bring that up in the last municipalities meeting about the upcoming permit. That was a note that I brought up, and I think it is in the notes to talk to DEQ about. I don't know if DEQ is thinking about it. I think they're so high level on things like this that even when it comes to our permit tracking and stuff, everything seems very straightforward, but you do have to think about economic impacts. I'm all for being environmental, but I don't want people to be lose the ability to build a house because they can't build a $20,000, retention facility.
And I'm going to use the example of something like Camus Commons at the intersection of 53rd and Country Club. It's on the northeast corner of 53rd and Country Club. It was a affordable housing community that was built, I'm going to say early 2000s. As affordable housing units go these days, it's pretty palatial, but it's an example of a sort of village setting where a regional treatment is really a better idea than doing it on a house by house basis.
Yes.
And so if you have affordable housing that's being developed by the subdivision process or by a I don't know, the division of a large tract of land that say purchased by Corvallis Neighborhood Housing or similar. Oftentimes those treatment and detention systems will be designed for the entire build out of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that urban setting, you have the opportunity to just have a single detention pond and a single set of treatment swales or something like that. And it wouldn't necessarily have the same effect of providing those amenities on a single lot development. And now that doesn't get rid of the equity issue. But what it does is it gives an avenue to achieve that affordable housing while accomplishing the same environmental goals. I agree with Shay though. I see it as an equity issue because if you have all the money in the world, these are problems you can make go away. If you don't, and you're on a shoestring budget and you're doing a lot of the building in your house yourself, odds are you're not going to have a lot of experience with how to, build a rain garden or build an infiltration system or how to maintain, or even to have the interest in maintaining it. And so there are problems. I mean, there are problems both from the standpoint of what you could build and where, but also how much it costs and who can afford it. So.
I did a little bit of searching to see if there were grants and such available for private parties, and I wasn't able to find anything. There are grants for municipalities to implement their own, ironically, implement their own low impact development and green infrastructure, but there isn't something similar for the public.
So there's nothing through USDA.
Not that I could find.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the closest thing that I can think of that you'd be able to apply for would be through the state revolving fund,
Oh,
which
maybe,
is
yeah.
primarily focused on, like septic issues and that sort of thing. And I think maybe some legislative rethinking needs to be done in terms of how these things are financed. And I think that's something we should take to the board and ask them to mention to our legislators and stuff. In addition to that, I mean, one of our other problems is how do we fund this program? We've had this problem all the way along. And believe me, 8 years ago, I was not spending half of my time on this particular issue. It's grown over time. And the municipalities have the capacity to create permit fees and hang them on their water bills or their sewer bills or their street maintenance bills and stuff like that, and fund full-time employees in order to populate their stormwater staffs. We do not have that. We do not have utilities. We do not have the ability to impose any kind of fees or charges on the local populace without some kind of referendum. And even that would have to be revisited by the voting populace on a regular basis. And I don't think would be a reliable source of income. And so, there's this other legislative issue of how do counties fund this unfunded mandate that's been handed to us by the feds and DEQ, and we don't really have an answer for it.
Any other questions for Ms. Steinglass or Mr. Kurtz?
Oh, I still actually have just a few brief slides for you.
Okay. I'm
So
sorry.
make it fun.
This is the fun one.
Yeah.
This is the good stuff.
You get the biology teacher part. So yeah, just for a little bit of environmental context, I haven't met a lot of you. I'm Shay Steinglass. I'm the environmental project coordinator for Public Works. Thank you for letting us speak to you today. I just wanted to kind of circle it all back to, why we're doing what we're doing. We're all familiar with water cycle, and Gordon had some really interesting and poignant points. For one, the rain and precipitation events that we're seeing today are on the scale of 1,000-year events. We don't have 2-year floods anymore, 50-year floods. We're getting rain events that we haven't seen for 1,000 years statistically. And so that makes it very, oops, I didn't even touch the button.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I was like, it's working. And so, a lot of the issues that we see in Oregon, we want to minimize surface runoff, as Gordon mentioned. We want to maximize infiltration, and that is something that we've ecologically lost because of agricultural and urban development, land clearing, homogenizing the environment. And we're just starting to realize the impacts of that now. And one example I was going to mention to you is it's a chemical called 6-PPDQ, and that is a chemical derivative. They just in the last few years, they empirically figured out what this was, and it was causing a high rate of salmon mortality, particularly in Washington under bridges. It was like 50 to 100% mortality within hours of rain events. These salmon were just dying. Nobody could figure out what it was, and researchers in Washington finally isolated the compound and realized it was derived from 6-PPD, which is a preservative in tires. And when UV light degrades it, it turns into 6-PPDQ. I think the Q is quinone. And it's incredibly toxic to certain species of salmon. So it's wild that we didn't see those mortalities until recently. The ability to filter this stuff out of our water is extremely complicated, and you're going to see a slew of lawsuits about this chemical because it is so pervasive in things like water systems. Just like it's polyfluoroalkylated substances, PFAS. Same thing, where it's so difficult to get out. But they have found, I just saw an email today, that pervious pavements actually filter a significant amount of this stuff out. So that might be something we see across the Pacific Northwest, which I think is cool. Anyway, so runoff does
Yeah.
that kind of.
I'd like to add to
Yeah.
what you were saying about the 6-PPD is that the story behind how they've found these chemicals and figured out what it was is really compelling, and it's worth looking for. But we should find.
There's gotta be
online
movies
so that we can share with them. But the funny thing about it is that it's basically a franking chemical. Nobody knows what the chemical really is. I mean, they know its chemical structure, but they don't know who created it. They don't know where it came from. And in truth, industry in general has hundreds of thousands of these kinds of substances, which are not really recognized as being real substances, simply because they're proprietary. And nobody wants anybody else to know why their tires last longer than somebody else's tires. And it's frightening.
Yeah,
It's
it
what
is.
it is.
And I think we're going to start seeing more of these types of things in general. Another aspect of water quality that Scott talked about is the water table. We all know that is decreasing. We've got to find ways to stabilize it. I was a resident on the coast for years, and at least 2 households I knew of did not have water by the time I left because again, development, and you think about coastal soils, they get all that rain, but it's really, the environment is designed to flush that right back out to the ocean. It's not designed to hold the water. So those are all issues that we're facing. And I think we're just gonna continue to see things get more complicated. Another thing I always like to say is, this is a grim thing, but it's Halloween. We're all 3 days away from dehydrating. So water is so critical for all of us, and I think we're just really beginning to understand that regionally and as a country. Is that me or you? Did it work? So yeah.
She's just anticipating.
I know, yeah. So the reason we care about this stuff is that not only for human health, but we care about our environment here in the Pacific Northwest. Can you go to this one? This is my animation that I made that goes before I meant it to, but the other thing that Gordon touched on is sediment particles, especially things like silt that are very, very tiny. They all have a negative charge, and that attracts all of those pollutants that we're worried about, from heavy metals, mercury in the atmosphere. Fun fact, mercury can come from more than just car emissions. The #1 mercury contributor in California is from crematoriums. So it is so heavy in our bodies already that incineration is so that's great. I don't know. But yeah, we're treading a very thin line that I think we're just becoming more aware of. So that is why we care about sediment. And one of the things that I've been focusing on, I guess I kind of fell into it since I started here. I remember Gary Stockoff sent me an email about a beaver right when I started, and he's like, I guess this is you. So I just kind of picked up that thread. I've been working with local watershed councils, NOAA fisheries, other stakeholder groups. There's a huge, and I did not know anything about this when I started this job, even coming from wildlife science. There's a huge movement towards understanding the ecosystem values that beavers give us. And this is international scale movement. There have been some really incredible studies out of Minnesota primarily, Emily Fairfax, but there's other groups we're realizing that, you know, when we think about our wild and scenic rivers, we think of a big wide open stream reach. And the reality of that is because from the colonial era to the industrial era and the beginning of the logging industry, we would clear cut things, and we would use the water bodies as a way to move materials, but also it was considered good stewardship to clean all of that out because we didn't want to get in the way of salmon. But what we forgot is that salmon had been here 6 million years, and nobody was there to pick the wood out of the streams back then, as far as I'm aware. So, you know, starting in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, there was a large movement to actually start putting woody debris back in streams, because now we realize it's a temperature refuge, it's an environmental and reproductive refuge. And that's part of the TNDL program too. Temperature is considered one of our biggest limiting pollutants. And so a surprising ally, folks have started doing empirical studies of beaver sites and found that they have incredible impacts on the local water table, as well as sediment and pollutant chemistry. So I love this chart. You can see this is after a precipitation event on the top here. So you have this huge influx of precipitation right here. You can see the rain. This is above a beaver dam, and this is below a beaver dam. So you can see that the beaver site actually holds this water like a sponge. And not only that, it creates a wider habitat that creates more, you know, diverse habitat for fish and other species. We've had trail cams out at a local beaver site, 53rd underpass that we all love. I drive by there every day, and we have a group of beavers that has been damming that area that makes the road flood. We've been going out there every 3 weeks or so to kind of notch the dam and keep that safe. But in the next couple of weeks, we will be putting in a pond leveler array that should hopefully lower that water level by 12 to 14 inches. Fingers crossed that that does a lot to help prevent that flooding. There's other things that can be done there. But I've had a trail cam out there, and we saw a family of river otters. We saw a green heron, which was really cool. I've never seen one up close. Bobcats, I'm pretty sure it was a bobcat, and raccoons, all in that little beaver dam right by the road. So these guys do incredible work, and, you know, animal advocacy is one thing, but also realizing that we may be working against ourselves by, you know, clearing out some of these ecosystem engineers that do a lot of great work for us. I do really like this. So this is the water that was above the dam, and that was the water that came from below the dam. So pretty rad.
This is my favorite for you.
Yeah, this is the last kind of bit of the beaver thing. I know this is a little odd topic, but, you know, I'm always happy to talk in the future, but it is a nice kind of holistic, I guess, mention of something we've been focusing on in the county. So Emily Fairfax in Minnesota, and Andrew Whittle, I don't know Andrew, I think he was a grad student. In 2020, they did a study of California wildfires, both at beaver dam sites and away. And what they found was really incredible, which is this beaver dam here. Essentially, this entire area is burned, and there's this corridor of green where the beaver dam was, because that ground is so saturated, and there's enough moist vegetation to prevent burning. This is another really striking, this is actually in Oregon. So you can see the beaver pond is here before things burnt, and then after they burned, the only thing there that is still green is that beaver pond. They also snapped a really cool image of a little black bear, ironically Smokey the bear. This is Smokey the beaver. That was just sitting at that little beaver site, and he looked so relieved to be there. I cannot find that photo, but yeah, so that is just something you may not be aware of, the work that's ongoing. As you know, too, Oregon trapping laws are changing around beavers, and we're trying to kind of stay on top of that. But I'm hoping this pond leveler array and these coexistence type of efforts make a difference. And I hope they're positive. We'll see.
And what's your big sky idea for that area?
Yeah, well, and I'm very excited about it personally, but, who knows how long it'll be.
I'm on board, so.
Yeah, so, the project that Laurel is, headed up and we're trying to move towards in that corridor, Denali Creek, which is, very, traditionally important ecosystem here in the valley. Where that underpass dips to the lowest is actually where the stream traditionally ran. So we have about 300 feet of the right of way on the east side there to build this overpass that, because they no longer allow at level crossings at the railroads, we have to go over, to build a skyway. So when that is done, the plan is to daylight Denali Creek back to its natural channel. And that mitigation wetland that the county has spent millions of dollars on to the northwest of that will then be connected to Denali Creek all the way through town.
Oh, wow.
With
Um,
beavers.
With
Yeah.
beavers, they're already on both sides of it. so.
Yeah, and the other really cool thing about that is that even though, you know, you've got a very large, dense housing development coming in Andrew Martin's property on the, I guess it would be, best way to refer to it is the northeast corner of 53rd and West Hills. So that whole big area that's like between the railroad tracks and West Hill Road is going to become basically subdivisions. But there's a really large tract of land in the middle of it around Denali Creek, which is designated as open space. And one of our efforts is to try and engage with the city and with local stakeholders to promote the idea of like a beaver refuge in that area so that we would have this cohabitation running from as far away as 2034 up the Denali corridor into the mitigation area underneath the new bridge and into the headwaters of Bald Hill. And, you know, Denali and Oak Creek are like really the two primary waterways in urban Corvallis, and I think there's merit in restoration of those waterways. And there are other things like in development that I think will assist in that process as well.
And if you all want to see Pub Mobile at work that isn't at that site, if you go to Bruce Starker Arts Park, we put one in last year, right by about this time of year, right by that parking lot. So if you just walk a little bit to the right into the woods there, you will, not very far, maybe 10 yards. There's a huge beaver pond there now. And we put that leveler in and it did help. It didn't 100% solve the flooding problem because that parking lot is so low, but it did make a big difference last year. So you don't get to see those systems like right up close.
It's just a few hundred feet south.
Yeah, I saw Toby out there walking when we were doing it, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's all I had, so thank
Yes.
you for sticking with
Thank
me.
you, thank you for your patience.
Thank you both, and again, our apologies for deferring you. We appreciate your patience with us.
Stuff happens.
So we're in the updates from Planning Commission as well as staff, and I wanted to offer a bit of time to both Commissioner Fulford and Commissioner Hayman to offer any updates, discussion topics, and so forth on their respective subcommittees.
Greg, you want to go first?
You go first.
All right.
I've not much to add, so.
I think I have some slides, if we can find those. Pull those up. And I'll try to be fairly quick. I think there's a few key pieces in here. We've been meeting with a variety of community folks since, let's say, late spring. And now we're heading, it's almost done the socialization phase, but let me give you an update. So next slide, please. So the goal is obviously to enable regional community to explore opportunities, right? High-level timing goals. You can see what we've been working through November, December. We're looking forward to setting some agendas, getting the framework and some strategic direction with all the community members outlined and moving forward. The April through, I'll say October, that begins socialization effort, building trust and gaining insight has been pretty important. Let's go to the next slide. This is the socialization piece is pretty important. We've met with 44 plus groups. And when I say groups, usually a lot of the meetings are 2 to 3 people. And so 44 is individuals and groups that are larger than one. So it might be closer to like 80 folks that we've met with. And I broke it out into a nice little spreadsheet, of course, and I've ranked them there. Government 22. You can see the variety of folks we've met with, developers, 4 conservationists, 2 employers around the valley, 6 in housing experts that use various models and frameworks to get housing spun up. So a lot of good insight here. We've been meeting with Liz, been participating as well as Rick in most of those, and it's been really good. We have developed some criteria on the leadership team. The way we think it'll end up breaking out is if like 30 people want or groups want to participate, maybe having a leadership team of 8 to 10. And we've taken a first, we've developed a criteria for deciding who should be in that and who shouldn't be in that. And we've done a first pass on ranking those scores. So it's pretty good. It's probably about 20 pieces of criteria that we rank all the folks against, and then we score it. So that's pretty nice. We're getting close to the end. Next slide. Hopefully the evaluation criteria will shake out or at least float to the top. Most of the folks that need to be on the leadership team, then we'll have some discussions on their availability and interest to be in that. Public-private funding, we're getting to the point now of there's some early things that we should do to get the thing kicked off right. And one of them is the framework, subject matter experts and facilitation. We have some in all our discussions, a couple of things have shooken out that one is SEDCOR, for example. They did something similar to what we're trying to do in Yamhill. And it was pretty impressive. They had 3 manufacturing facilities there that struggled with getting affordable workforce housing. And they basically met every month for about 3 to 4 years and shook out some good best practices on how to move forward and get that moving forward. So that's still shaking out a little bit, how we're going to do that, who we're going to go with. Yeah. And then we'll set up some meetings, first probably with the leadership team to make sure we're heading the right direction and they're all on board with the framework and who's going to help facilitate. And then we'll start moving out. That's probably November, December, maybe even January timeframe. The next one, here's the current status. Things that are on track. I think the kickoff went well. Socialization had a little lull in the middle. And so subcommittee formation is moving well behind. Losing some ground on legislations for the January 2025. Hoping still that we can do it, but I heard the first submittals were due this week. So I'm a little worried about that, but we have to organically kind of build that. So a little behind, I'll call that, in the comms plan and the budget. We're making it work, but really haven't got any money and haven't really asked for it yet from like HPNO issue and all those, but hinted. And they're all on board. We'll see how much are on board here soon. Ahead, I'll call it the periodic review, the comprehensive plan, and the framework model. I think we actually had some things float out in that area, which, we're just going to be enabling. We're not the subject matter experts. We're just trying to get everybody together. But we think we've got some good workable frameworks to get the stuff going. unexpected delays, community director change, obviously. The second one, city, county, OSU delayed in aligning separate housing efforts into one collaborative strategy, still working on that. OSU was leading a consortium of a bunch of different folks. But that's coming over, I think. And the city's kind of doing their own thing, but they understand what we're doing, how we're trying to get it. But I think that'll work, right? Let the city focus on the city stuff and let us engage all the other surrounding communities to kind of push it forward. And still need budget numbers. So I think that's it, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So anyway, quick update. I think it's moving pretty good though.
Thank you. I also recall that perhaps you wanted to nominate a citizen member to your subcommittee.
Yes, that's right. Liz Irish, I'd like to nominate her as a citizen committee member to the regional housing. She has basically spent all the time through the spring and summer, and there was a lot of information gathered and trust built with all these folks, and to lose her at this point would be detrimental for sure. So I'd like to nominate her as a citizen member.
Certainly concur with that, and we did consult with county council on how to do that. We found it's quite easy in that the planning commission chair has the ability to ratify that appointment, and county council suggested we do that in the form of a public meeting such as tonight. And so we will affirm that appointment of Liz Irish to the subcommittee. Any other questions for Commissioner Fulford? Any updates from?
Oh, well, gosh. So the work of what we think we call the code committee or something like that.
All things code.
All things code has been basically brought into the work of the comprehensive planning and community engagement strategies, and which is really where we need to be. And now I'm not butting my head against anything anymore. And so Commissioner Struthers and I have been involved in that work, and we have another meeting coming up. Is it this week, tomorrow? Pretty soon.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna be there, but.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, so we're both Commissioner Struthers and myself are actively involved in that work, and I feel I'm better understanding sort of how we're going to proceed there. And so it's been a great education, I think, for us. And I don't know if you want to add anything, but that's where we're at.
Well, one thing on the development code that we ended up spending a lot of staff time on was trying to broaden the scope of the statutory requirements from the House bills that had come down with our consultant to get through that first phase. They've been kind of housing experts recently, so they kind of came with a housing focus. And we don't think that's broad enough because there's pretty limited policy work in the counties for housing. So we went back ourselves 10 years and identified 15 statutory requirements that have been not completely implemented or not implemented at all. And I have if you're interested, I have a summary of all of those and how we've prioritized them. So I can send that but that's kind of hot off the press.
Yeah.
So now they've made a commitment to incorporating those 15 statutes and their associated administrative rules. And so we're on a roll finally.
No, thank you. That's encouraging. Which agency does the administrative rules under those statutes?
LCDC.
Okay.
On some of the land use stuff, I believe it comes from different directions based on whatever state agency has the regulatory authority.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I'll add just for the rest of the planning commission that we've invited Ms. Shannon Bush to provide us an update at our November 5th meeting. As you may recall, excuse me, she's leading the communications outreach and the consulting engagement of the comp plan update.
while we've been a little short-staffed in an interim role and kind of called to some other duties, Shannon was nice enough to pick up the torch of the contract management piece.
Very well. We'll put Ms. Sheets on the hot seat and ask if there's any community development updates.
No application for Coffin Butte yet. They had kind of teased us with the September date, and that didn't happen. I haven't heard anything from them. The other thing that happened was based on there was the St. Martin's Church, that was an administrative appeal to Planning Commission. I wrote what I thought was legally defensive interpretation, that was the end of the process because it began as an administrative process opposed to quasi judicial. And council agreed that I have a legally defensible code interpretation. Regardless, the citizens have appealed to LUBA in a timely manner.
Okay.
So we're gonna have to vet that decision.
And then updates from the Planning Commission. I would just offer one observation for thought, and that is anticipating the Republic Services reapplication or resubmission of an application. I was thinking about the anticipated size of the staff report. It is going to be substantial.
Mhm.
And our usual Q&A process with the staff report is kind of a free-for-all. And it makes sense because we just kind of jump in with what we have. But given the complexity and the anticipated size and what I anticipate each of you is going to do in terms of homework, preparing for this important application, we would probably formalize. I'm thinking of formalizing the Q&A period. And if you've ever seen a legislative hearing, either at the federal or the state level, we will allocate time for each of you. And so rather than doing ad hoc, if we allocate time to each of you, it allows you to continue a train of thought through the questions, through the entire staff report. And so we'll start with Commissioner Fulford, and you'll have 10 minutes to ask all of your questions, uninterrupted by other questions of the other planning commissioners. And then we'll proceed to the next until all of the planning commissioners have had their opportunity to exhaustively ask all of their questions. And at the end of that, we'll open it up for the free-for-all again. So that if you think of questions after your time allotment, there's still the opportunity to come back and make sure your question is answered.
And we're still addressing in that setting, we're still addressing them to the staff, not to anybody else.
Other than, I don't know what the relationship with the consultant evaluating and essentially doing the staff report will be. It'll probably address just to the staff member.
Yeah, there's some technical support.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they will not be presenting any material.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Okay.
that makes it simple.
All right.
And the same process would be for the applicant, when the applicant makes their presentation and so forth.
And then again, a kind of a structured committee.
A structure, go through each
Yeah.
committee member so that everyone has the opportunity to follow a multiple question line of thinking.
And you want it to be for questions. You don't want commissioners to go into any speeches or any, I don't know.
No, it's not appropriate for us to introduce evidence.
Right.
It's
So-
the interaction with the person providing.
Based on the information and the evidence that's presented to us, right? Okay. I just wanted to clarify. Good.
Okay. Any other updates from anyone on the commission or from staff? Very well, I believe.
I have one.
Oh, okay.
Code compliance. We have 4 candidates that we're gonna be interviewing on the 11th. We
Excellent.
got a pool of 16, which was decent for the positions. Looking forward to
Excellent.
moving forward on that.
Yeah, they'll jump into the deep end as soon as they get hired.
Sorry, for which position? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, Sarah, code enforcement officer?
Thank you.
Yes.
So if there are no other questions, no other comments, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you, Greg, for stepping in for my tardiness. I appreciate that.
I recognize the
He was off to a race.
limitations associated with traffic, so I
Oh.
knew where we were going.
Yeah, that's what, and we did raise the issue